Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for sticking around or joining us for this next panel, focusing predominantly on the data center industry and the many issues and challenges that we face there. First off, I would like to say a special thank you to our sponsors for the session, CSF Advisors. We have Billy on the panel who will be able to give some insights, so please stick around and listen. So without further ado, I'll hand over to our esteemed moderator for the session, James Murphy, who's the Managing Director at DC Byte, to introduce the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you everyone for taking the time to join us now. We've got a really exciting panel, certainly based on our pre-discussions, to go through today. So we've got 45 minutes to tackle 3 questions, so I'm going to get straight into it. Hand over to Oliver for a quick intro, and then go through the panelists.
Thanks very much, James. My name is Oliver Jones. I'm the Chief Executive of Chayora Holdings. I'm based in Hong Kong, and we develop hyperscale data center campuses in mainland China. Large campus outside Beijing, large one outside Shanghai, and we'll be developing our 3rd in the Shenzhen area in the course of 2023.
Thank you. Billy?
Hi, my name is Billy. Based in Malaysia, we have built around 300 data centers in ASEAN. And we also are one of the largest dark fiber DC operator in Malaysia. We have all the telcos interconnected with us. Thank you.
Alex?
Thanks, James. My name is Alex Teo. I work with Next DC. We're an Australian data center operator, owner. We specialize in building Tier 4 gold certified facilities for the hybrid cloud.
Great. Michael?
Michael, Iron Mountain Data Centers. So we are actually a global data center provider with more than 20 facilities worldwide in Europe, Northern America, and in Asia as well.
Hi, Narendra here. I'm founder of Egbank Data Center. We have data center in India, in central India. We are building 8 sites across India in Tier 2 cities, targeting local zones and OTT customers. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for the introduction. We're going to dive straight into it, and there's 3 questions which we want to kind of cover across today. The first question we're going to look at is how ownership models are changing and what is the impact on build-outs and deployments. So we're going to be looking at this through the lens of the end user. I think the general assumption is that everyone's going to cloud, and that's the only option people have now. But we want to talk about some of the different and some kind of interesting stories which were shared about what enterprise customers are doing, for example. So Narendra, we might start with you, because during our pre-planning, you had a couple of interesting examples. Not everyone is just going exclusively to the cloud.
Yeah. So what we have seen in the movement is coming from cloud to colo. So when the technology customer adopts SaaS-based or any technology enterprise customer adopt the technology, they start with cloud, then go to expand their business up to $1 million to $2 million, $5 million per month revenue, and after 10 million or 5 to 10 million, they move back. They decided, let's move back to the colo because the cost is going very high, infrastructure costs, especially for OTT customers and some of the educations. We have seen BFSI as well. BFSI is moving out of cloud, and large SaaS-based companies are moving out of cloud and going on colo. So that's a great opportunity for data center operator, not focusing on only 3 large, because our entire business model is dependent on the 3 public cloud providers. So I think there are great examples and use cases we have seen personally. It might be the thing that cloud is commoditized, the technology is freely available and open source, and that's why Indians technology customers want to save money, and they are ready to go on that path. And some of the challenges which we have seen similar, like there's, say, hyperscale cloud A has their multiple business, including e-commerce and streaming. So Indian streaming players and e-commerce, they don't want to go and join that platform. So they started building their own. So those are the examples we have experienced.
Great. And Michael, Alex, a lot of your facilities are obviously the what are generally termed as the tier 1 markets in APAC. Have you seen any changes on this kind of trend? Are people still more or less going to the cloud, or are there a few different ownership models to take into consideration?
From what I'm seeing, I mean, the whole market in general, right? The hyperscalers to today takes up about 75% of the whole market. We talk about new deals, 75%. What we call the retail providers are about 25%. So having said that, what we are seeing is, of course, the real demand, the real builds today are based on predominantly hyperscales, right? You build campuses. It used to be just buildings of 5 megawatts, 10 megawatts. Now you see people having campuses, 50, 100, 200 megawatts campuses. That's predominantly to cater for this hyperscale market, to build them. But you will see that most operators, I don't say most, some operators do factor for the remainder 25% of the retail providers, right? And Iron Mountain is one of them, right? I mean, although hyperscalers are one of the big, we cannot ignore this market. But the retail market is growing just as fast. Of course, it's dwarfed by whatever that's happening in the hyperscale market, but it's a segment that you cannot ignore, and it's still a pretty lucrative market. And it's not a segment that a lot of people are actually going to. So you see the builds-wise, there are providers as pure hyperscales. There are also providers as doing reserving capacity just for retail capacity, right? To make sure that we also cater for even the tier 2 or tier 3 content providers and the retail enterprise customers.
Great. Any examples from Australia, Alex?
I think you need to look at different types of data centers. So the way that we see it, you know, if you just consider data centers as a whole group, you're missing quite a bit of optimization that we're seeing happening in the industry. So if you're talking about very large campuses, let's say 300 megawatt campus, there is a certain ownership structure which is suitable for something that big, if for nothing else, just the sheer volume of capital that you need to construct something of that size. We see the industry, I suppose, as 4 separate segments. You've got the campuses, you've got the metropolitan data centers, we've got regional data centers. So in size, metropolitan might be a 30 to 80 megawatt data center. A regional one for a small city might be 10 to 30 megawatts. And everyone's, of course, very excited about edge data centers, where we're talking about things of, up to, say, 1 megawatt in size. And I think that there are different ownership structures that are appropriate for each of these different segments. Some structures work better than others.
Great. And Billy, I wanted to ask you about Malaysia, because obviously there's a huge amount of leasing activity happening in Johor right now, which I think a lot of people will know who the end user is. But it looks like 2 of the 3 hyperscalers are certainly going down at least the partially self-build route. Like how is that panning out in Malaysia? What impact is that having on on people's build-outs? Are people nervous about the fact that the big cloud providers are building themselves, or is that welcome?
Well, actually, Malaysia, we welcome all new investment into data center. I myself is working together with Malaysia Digital Corporations, who kind of like oversee all the data center investment. Because we are, CSF, we also part of the DC consultant and developer. We also consult them what type of data center and where is the right location. In fact, a lot of new happening, a lot of people are seeing is in southern Johor, where it's closer to Singapore. 2 years ago, our Malaysia capacity were about like 200 megawatts IT. And next year, we are seeing something around 400 megawatts IT because of all this new hyperscaler coming up. And the one that we are involved, I will say in next 5 years, there should be somewhere around 4,000 megawatts of capacity are coming up in Malaysia, which from 200, 400, and then 4,000. That's a huge growth. And not everything will be in southern Johor. because I myself is involved something that is in Northern, that is between the Thailand and Malaysia border. And we also have an East Coast site. There will be something that's coming up. And also are involved in 2 more projects, which is in East Malaysia. Okay, that is Sabah and Sarawak. There are a lot of new DC park development that are coming up and coming. So that's why I say from 4,000 megawatt of capacity.
Great. And Oliver, like I think when we talk about the hyperscalers, quite often we're just talking exclusively about the AWS, Google, Microsoft. We tend to kind of think in terms of the American ones. But like what's happening in China, are the Chinese hyperscalers kind of mirroring the activity that we're seeing around the rest of Southeast Asia, or are they kind of doing their own thing? And is the situation up in China different to what we see in the rest of the region?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. One of the things, firstly, I'd echo Alex's comment in terms of the different types of data center with different solutions in terms of ownership. But to your point, in China, one of the interesting features is that for the larger campus environments, and our campuses are typically, well, the Beijing one around 300 megawatts of MVA of gross power, the Shanghai one at about 130 MVA. So large facilities that can accommodate essentially any scale that a customer might want to go to. What we see in China is that the big cloud players, particularly Ali and Tencent and more recently ByteDance, have been doing exactly what AWS and Microsoft and Google have been doing in other parts of the world, where they require big scale, they prefer to own it and develop it and create it themselves. The interesting dimension, though, is that for those larger dominant players, the speed of growth and the demand increases that they're facing in the Chinese market, as we were hearing from our friends in China Unicom a little bit earlier, the speed of growth often means that you can't have the capacity when you want it. And that's where external parties who've already got the power and the fiber and the land combinations, which have just as many complications as in other parts of the world, but in China today, power is the absolute key to whether you can use a site or not. So often those big guys will collaborate with external counterparties, organizations of a similar shape to ourselves. The interesting other dimension, though, is the next level down. If you look at tomorrow's wannabes, the ones who want to be the next Ali or Tencent, which might be a Kuaishou, or it might be a kind of uCloud or others of that sort, Meituan, some of the big app providers, some of the big cloud providers, many of them just don't have the internal capacity to have developed the learning that Ali and Tencent have done. So therefore, they will work with expert organizations. But I've no question that over a period of a short while, each of them will move to that same position as Ali and Tencent as well. So we need to be there to meet burst need. We need to be there to provide reference quality global standards. But we mustn't forget that they will always prefer to do it themselves if ultimately they can.
Thank you, everyone, for those insights. We're going to move on to the next question, and I think it would be remiss to have a session like this and not talk about Singapore and the moratorium and the impact it's having across the region. So, obviously, the moratorium is due to be lifted, only a small amount of capacity. Exactly. The moratorium will be lifted with a limited amount of capacity to come on, but I think a lot of people, particularly international enterprises, probably still see Singapore as the default location to deploy. So I wanted to pose the question to Michael. When people find out that there's no capacity in Singapore, what are their initial thoughts? Where do they start to look outside?
So talk about global customers coming in, default definitely is Singapore. In fact, it used to be Singapore, Hong Kong, or Tokyo when they talk about Asia, right? It's basically these 3 markets. So Singapore itself, with the moratorium and with only 60 megawatts coming online within the next 3 to 4 years, of course there's going to be a spillover, right? But what I'm seeing in the market is it's going to be different from what a lot of people are thinking about a spillover to just Johor and Batam, right? There will be spillover to that. There is demand, but if we talk about global enterprises, are they comfortable putting their data in another country? It's still a different country, right? You still need to put the data, even though it's just next to Singapore, you still need to put the data in Malaysia, you still need to put the data in Indonesia. It's still subject to the local privacy laws, data privacy laws, which is changing actually every year, right? So there is a risk there that these companies face, and what I'm seeing is that a lot of these companies are reluctant to be going into these two markets. But what I'm seeing generally in the market is, I feel that the spillover is not going to be just two markets. If today the demand in Singapore is 1 gigawatt of new deals, I feel that about half of it will go to these two markets, yes. The other half will be going into the key regional markets. Singapore used to be providing data for the whole Southeast Asia and South Asia market in India, right? The spillover today, what I'm seeing, is going a lot to Jakarta. You see the Jakarta market booming. India, Mumbai, Chennai market is booming as well. And I see that, I believe the other markets like KL, Bangkok, Philippines, they are all becoming up a lot more. And these are all beneficiaries of what is happening in the world, decentralization. People want the data to be near to them. They want the response time. They want the user experience to be near to them. And that's where I'm seeing that it's all going towards that direction at all, not just Batam and Johor.
Thanks, Michael. So you mentioned about half the potential supply will go to Malaysia and Batam. Billy, how is Malaysia positioning itself to take advantage of this potential boom and potential demand? Is it doing anything different to ensure that the majority of that data which is up for grabs ends up in Malaysia?
Yes, we are actually well prepared. In fact, the very early data center park in Johor is called KIDEX, or Serdana Tech Park now. We also are in partnership with the owner, is Johor Corporation. In fact, now we are in discussion that currently they have about 600 acres of land that is catered for data center hyperscaler to be there. And now we are doing a plan for 700 acres addition. So add together, there will be 1,003 acres of land. Not only that, beside this location, there also are a couple of new developments within the location, within Johor. There also are people are looking into developing private hyperscale data center location. So yes, there's a lot of capacity that is now developing in that area. But I also personally involved in a couple of new deals that is now looking into KL. Actually, KL still have the attractions for a lot of compute nodes. But of course, in terms of percentage, I would say 60% probably will be in Johor, 30% will be in KL. And then the other 10% will be somewhere else, like the northern and the east coast of Malaysia. There are still some demand going on there. Yeah.
Okay, and Alex, what about the situation in the kind of the key markets in Australia and actually some of the other markets which people talk about but have yet to really start to develop, like the likes of Perth, Brisbane? Is the moratorium and the kind of the situation in Southeast Asia having any sort of noticeable impact on what's happening in Australia?
Yes, it is. So I think there are two different drivers that it's kind of instructive to think of them separately. One is that the compute, the storage, would be going out to their natural homes anyway, right? And Singapore was always just an interim step to that compute and storage eventually finding their way to their eventual homes. So what I mean by that is it would be the intent of a lot of, let's talk about a global streaming provider, right? It would be or a global social media company. It would be the intent to host that content probably in the home country in which that content is produced. But as an interim step to roll out the infrastructure, Singapore may have been used as a hub, right? So the fact that there isn't the capacity, because of the moratorium, there isn't the capacity to use Singapore as a hub, that's just accelerated the way in which the customers have been rolling out the infrastructure quicker to where it eventually would be anyway. So I think that's that is driver number one. And driver number two is I suppose it's always useful to have a hub to spread out and to spread out from there. And I think some of the business that we're seeing, so I had the pleasure last night of having dinner with a number of people, but the CEO of GDS was there, and they've announced a 64 megawatt order in Johor just last week. That's widely speculated to be a well-known, very large social media platform. Now, that platform would have probably come to Singapore if that capacity was available, simply because of the density of subsea cables that land here. But given they can't build that here, they've just looked to build that, the next available location, which is Johor. So I think these are two different trends, and or two different drivers. The moratorium has accelerated one and caused Singapore to be substituted in the other one.
And Narendra, it seems, Michael touched upon it already, but it seems strange that data for Indian data would be being held in Singapore. Has the moratorium given what is already a very hot Indian data center market an even further boost, or has it not played such a role?
Not really, but India itself has a captive demand. 800 million people online out of 1.4 billion, similar like China, and that in itself has a huge demand. So international players entered into India, announced multiple gigawatt. We believe that India market is going to be in another 10 years, 8 to 10 gigawatt. Self-consumption, and the large hyperscale players started building their own because it's they do their build versus buy analysis, and so two market, Hyderabad and Pune, they are going to build their own. They are trying in Mumbai, but it's difficult market. But yeah, so they never go beyond 50% to build their own capacity as they did in their home market. I'm talking about a hyperscale customer. But demand is there. Data protection law is coming up, which is slightly, they relaxed a lot of norms, but still this will create chaos around the enterprise customers. And we see that sudden surge will happen in India due to that. So next year probably it will be announced. So we believe that current capacity will double. It is going to be 2 gigawatt in another 2 years. Yeah.
Great. And Oliver, is the moratorium impacting China, Hong Kong in any way, or are there any parallels or ripple effects that have been caused by the moratorium?
Well, I think it's more parallels and ripple effects, I think. There's two aspects that I'd highlight. I think, obviously, people have been very aware of the impact of COVID and changes up in Hong Kong over the course of the last few years, which has led to a significant exodus. And as a Hong Kong resident, apologies to all of you in Singapore whose rents are now going up because of everybody coming down here. But I think at a specific data level, there are some interesting parallels in China that are worth noting. The China Unicom presentation just before this talked about one of the policies in China, which was East data, West storage, which is a means of trying to make sure that where there is capacity constraints, which in all parts of the world are driven by usually power availability, particularly in the large cities, where data centers are consuming significant quantum of the power that's available, finding ways of how you bridge and have perhaps the data use in Singapore, the data storage for certain types of data being up in Malaysia is something I think that we're seeing a lot of in China. The interesting feature was that a few years ago, the similar moratorium to that we've just been talking about in Singapore existed and still exists in Beijing and Shanghai, where there is a limit on the amount of power that's available, and the valve that controls it is called an energy savings assessment. So a means of, unless you've got a highly efficient data center, unless you've auctioned and succeeded in getting the right to use the power, you can't be inside the city province limits, which has meant that much as we're hearing from Billy there in terms of going across to Johor, the existence of the larger scale data centers, if you want more than 3,000 or 4,000 racks in a particular location, you are adjacent to the big cities. So you're in Jiangsu or Zhejiang province for Shanghai, you're in Hebei or in Tianjin for Beijing and so on. So I think there's absolute parallels there. And it all then comes down to the different degrees of how much further you get away from the original power constraint. So I think parallels, but Singapore is a great city to attract a lot of great business, and I think it's a problem if it's not able to support that business with appropriate digital storage in collaboration with Malaysia or other locations.
Thanks, Oliver. The next question we're going to go on to, we were going to discuss the digital divide, but before that, like what did the panel think generally for the industry as a whole and for the end user? Do you think that the moratorium in Singapore has actually had a positive impact on, I suppose, the end customer experience? Like, is the fact that these data centers are now becoming more and more decentralized, is that actually a positive thing? It's not obviously for the people who want to keep building data centers in Singapore, but for the region as a whole, is that opening up more opportunities and more paths to economic growth? Anyone who'd like to take a stab at that?
Yes.
Yeah, I see that definitely. I think the moratorium actually helps in two ways, right? Of course, it helps to spread the markets out, not just in Singapore, and push it out to the region. The other thing that I'm seeing is that it actually drives innovations. The moratorium is actually driving the whole sustainability story of data centers. It actually drives a lot of innovations. I'll be surprised, I'll be interested to see what the coming DCCFA, I'm pretty sure a lot of operators will come up with innovative solutions to try to meet these sustainability goals that Singapore is doing. And actually it sets Singapore as one of the leaders of these innovations on data center technologies. I feel that is one of the main advantage that comes out of this.
Anyone else have anything to add, or shall we move on to the can data centers bridge the digital divide sustainably question? No? Okay, great. Let's go with that. So as I mentioned, it's with the moratorium, etc., things are becoming more decentralized. And we're going to talk about now how this has impacted the digital divide. So digital divide means different things to different people. But in this context, we're going to look at it from, I suppose, the economic perspective, how these new data centers in different markets are going to be benefiting the local populations in some of the emerging markets around the region. So might start with you this time, Oliver. How is this kind of decentralization benefiting some of the kind of, I suppose, the emerging markets or some of the secondary markets and some of the markets that you look at? And from a sustainable point of view, is this a positive thing?
I'll try to unbundle a couple of points in that question there, and others will pick up on other elements. I think, firstly, corporate social responsibility is something that's massively important for any organization, whether you're a domestic or an international player. And one of the features that I was describing a moment ago about how data centers are not necessarily cropping up in the CBD of the biggest cities, but are in the environs of that city, leads to interesting opportunities. And in one particular case, we have a collaboration with a local vocational university in order to be able to access well-educated, inspired, motivated young people, because we want that from the local environment ourselves, because that's good to give back to the community and show that we're part of the city as opposed to just visiting and trying to make money in the city. And particularly with data centers, because we employ relatively few people compared to other industries for the land and the capital that we deploy. I think it's massively important that we give opportunities for bright young people to get into the industry and therefore get on the first steps of the career path and go and move upwards from there. So I think bridging the digital divide. In China, there is a very good education system, a very big level of investment in what's called telecoms and big data at the university levels. And what we've found rather very positively, but rather surprisingly, is that the choice of high quality people that we've got is incredibly good at the entry level. And therefore, we've started to make that available to customers working with us, particularly international customers who also want to satisfy their sustainability and corporate social responsibility as well. So I think those are a couple of the aspects that are particularly important around the digital divide at the people level. Just on the green side and on the sustainability side at the environmental level, we work to achieving and offering 100% renewable power on our sites. That means we've got to team up with renewable power generators, in our case wind power as the predominant source. But what we know is that the global hyperscalers now want to see not just the offer of green power, they want to see additive green power. So the opportunity to not just use what's already out there, but increase the availability of it. And we found that as a data center operator, we have to now start working very closely with city leaders and first principals in China to create those secondary investment opportunities. So I think there's an awful amount of good opportunity to be done around this.
And with a lot of the tier one markets facing constraints for various reasons, obviously Singapore, the moratorium, Tokyo land power issues, Hong Kong, just I suppose the geopolitical situation a bit making people slightly nervous. A lot of the hyperscalers are now going into the emerging markets. So it seems like already they've got their presences in Jakarta. They're all sniffing around Manila, KL, as I mentioned earlier. Does this give, I suppose, the industry the opportunity? Michael, I'm going to pose this to you because you've already mentioned the innovation. But does this give the industry the opportunity to build things better in these markets? Because in a lot of these markets, they have access to things like renewables and things like that, which in a market like Singapore, there's obviously not much going on.
Yeah, it does. It's already happening. You look at the Singapore-based consultants, Singapore-based builders. A lot of them are now in huge demand to build such facilities, not in Singapore, but in the neighboring markets, right? I know most of the consultants now are actually, most of the customers demand them to use the Singapore consultants now for even markets in India, markets in Thailand, right? So that is happening, and that will no doubt increase the build quality, increase the standards of the data centers in these markets that is previously not so, not so well received. Even today, if you look at the data centers it's about 5-10 years ago, you'll see there's a huge gap between what's happening there and what's even in Singapore or what's happening in US and Europe, right? But to add on to previous question about the digital divide, I was in Amsterdam about 3 months ago. So Amsterdam has a very interesting thing that's happening in the market. To get a data center permit, to build a data center permit, let's say your data center is 300,000 square feet of building. You are required to build another 300,000 square feet of building to support the low income of housing or some facilities. So it has been drawn to that equivalent that they are trying to do that itself. That's pretty interesting to me. That's something that I learned in the trip when I was there.
Great. And Alex, when we were having our call in advance of this session, you mentioned that at NextDC you used to wear sustainability hat, and one of the things which I thought was really interesting was when I think you mentioned you got to a target of 40% green energy or renewable energy, but obviously demand for IT load is continually going up. So what are some of the challenges, and how did you meet those challenges when you were constantly trying to increase the amount of green energy you were able to secure to kind of keep that goal percentage where it needs to be?
Yeah, it's actually quite hard to match. So it's basically you're trying to match demand with supply, right? And your demand is growing all the time, and the supply tends to come in very large chunks, right? Someone's just turned on a new wind farm, and you suddenly got a massive amount of supply, and then you may not have that incremental supply coming for quite a while. So it's we were talking before. I think Oliver was talking before about promoting new supply rather than just taking up what's there. And that's something that we're obviously keen to do, to promote new, fresh, additional generation of renewable. But that's just very hard because, let's say we open a 80 megawatt data center. We don't turn on 80 megawatts at once, right? It ramps up. Even if you hand over a huge chunk of capacity to a customer, the customer doesn't flick a switch and turn on 80 megawatts of compute immediately. That just ramps up over time. Now, when you try and contract with a wind farm generator, that's exactly what you got. The wind farm's either on or off, right? And the moment it comes on, bang, you've suddenly got a huge amount of electricity. Now, we're a data center company. We're not a power company. We don't want to have earnings that are correlated to power prices, which is what you end up doing if you end up having to trade the overs and unders. So that's part of the challenge. Now, I'll have to admit, we have been using, bought on the market renewable energy certificates. So there's no actual generation. It's just a certificate that we've bought. And we also use bought on the market carbon credits to get to 100% 100% carbon offset. But it's it's just very, very hard to try and match your demand with supply that comes on the market.
Great, thanks, Alex. And Billy, with a lot of the hyperscalers now actively building or taking an interest in Malaysia, have we seen that their activity and their expectations around sustainable practice in general, have we seen many spillover effects for, I suppose, industries which support these?
Actually, in Malaysia, we are quite lucky in terms of all these green sustainability options. Because first is that solar is highly available in Malaysia, and we also have plenty of space. So you can build solar farm easily, and the efficiency is also quite good. You can get somewhere around 40% efficiency throughout the entire solar farm. There's one option. So the second option is that we have hydrogens, right, pipe and green gas pipe around most of the area. So if you want to go for gas options, you can do that easily as well. And we also have a program that is that allows you to take biogas, okay, to supply to your DC locations, through the existing gas pipe, and you can pump biogas into it, so to have a higher carbon credit returns. Beside that, the local power company, they also have this program that's enable you immediately that you can go for green energy tariff. Okay? Because from your normal energy tariff, you can subscribe to the green energy tariff so that you can kind of like support the green initiative that they are building through all the green generations to pumping into the same grid. Okay? So beside that, we also have options of hydro. Okay? There are certain locations, there's a lot of hydro power supply that you can go to them and take the hydropower options. Yeah. So in terms of green, we are quite okay. Yeah. And it's available for everyone to take it.
Great. And Narendra, obviously India is going through this incredible data center boom right now. And in talking with a lot of the operators over there, including yourself, a lot of these projects which are being announced have got tie-ins with sustainable power or other kind of social initiatives. I thought if you were able to share a few of these examples from India, I thought that would be really interesting, because I think India seems to kind of be leading the way actually in this place in tying all of these projects together for a common good.
Yeah, so I think India has, after Paris Agreement, our Prime Minister signed, the interesting fact is the renewable power is cheaper than the grid price. It's 30 to 40% cheaper. Because they made it commoditized, that more and more investor invested in solar in India, so price went down. So we partner with Renew Power, which is one of the largest solar producer in India. They've got 14 gigawatt deployed solar wind. So we partner with them, and after partnering with them, we have power that 100% data center can be run through this clean energy pipe, and 30% cheap. So it's an advantage for customer as well. Earlier, if you ask customer pay premium for the clean energy, they will not pay premium for that, So the other side of the story is that. Apart from the sustainable adoption in India, the liquid cooling market not hyperscalers are adopting, but the HPC, AI machine learning kind of applications, companies are now adopting this. And I truly believe that we should, as Michael, explained, that a lot of innovations come up after the moratorium period. And this liquid cooling technology is the way forward for hot, humid climate like India, Africa, and MENA region. So those adoption, we believe, like RegBank, our company has come up with the product around that. So we are going to deploy next data center on 100% liquid immersion cooling, which reduce our PUE 95%. And it is not a challenge of PUE, it is challenge of water as well in India. The water you'll not find in any cities. So that's a complete, government is going to put a hold on the water usage as well. So I think this new technology is going to change the roadmap of data center industry in India.
Great, no, thank you. Well, we're kind of coming to the end of what we had planned to discuss in this. I think it was great having a panel representing diverse markets, and I think this is a great forum for people to exchange best practice ideas and learn from each other what everyone is doing in the different markets. We've a couple of minutes left, so I thought I'd open the floor to a couple of questions. So if anyone had any questions they'd like to ask the panelists, we got a couple of minutes to answer some of them. Well, I'm going to ask the panelists something then. What are your kind of hopes? We've been kind of talking about the here and the now, but in 10 years' time, what kind of sustainability initiatives would you like to see become the norm? And how do you think we can get there in 10 years' time?
Well, I think it already is the norm. So we renewed our Master Services Agreement, our MSA, with one of the global hyperscalers just in the recent months. And the size of the MSA is enormous, right? So it goes on for over 1,000 pages. It's nearly 3 times the previous MSA we had with them. And in there are all sorts of undertakings around renewable power, zero waste, modern slavery, or I should say anti-modern slavery. So I think that, not that we are being dragged kicking and screaming into it, but our customers are increasingly imposing such values upon us. And I think it's good that they're doing that.
Oliver?
Yeah, I think, taking your question 10 years' time, I think it's really incumbent upon those of us who are leaders in this industry to make our industry associated with being good for the planet, not bad for the planet. And I think, I do occasionally get, when speaking to, young people audiences who see this huge energy-consuming, megalith of an industry, not doing enough about driving forward. Now, that's unfair, of course, because, as Alex was saying, particularly the US hyperscalers are setting incredible standards, going net zero in Microsoft's case is back to formation of the company over the next 5 to 10 years. But I think what we've got to do, we've got to work very hard, I think, on our brand identity and our industry identity to encourage more young people to come into the industry, to see it as an industry that is saving us all coming through the pandemic that we've got through it, but doing it in a good way. And I think the dinosaurs amongst us, including me by virtue of age particularly, need to learn from the people who are in their 20s and really driving us to do things better. So I think that's important.
So Oliver, the industry has a bit of a PR issue. Has anyone got any suggestions as to how we overcome this? Because, as we mentioned, the hyperscalers are driving incredible standards in terms of renewable adoption and things like this. Any practical suggestions on how we promote the industry so we're no longer seen as the baddies?
It should be sustainable, not only through the power, but sustainable in all the terms. Like what we are using to build a data center. Earlier, it used to be focused submarine cable, landing there, data center should be there. Now the focus is wherever the power is available, the data center is going to build there. So in another 10 years, what we believe that the fiber problem is resolved because nanosatellites and this OneWeb, and these market will boom, and you can set up data center in any climate region. So you're only 7 milliseconds away, wherever your data center is, right? And it will also change the game of edge data center, and maybe data centers in space commit too early, but 10 to 15 years, we think that would be possible.
Anyone else, anything to add before we say goodbye?
A facetious comment, perhaps. We had someone internally say that we need to. So we've got quite a bit of content on YouTube about being zero waste and, solar panels and renewable energy and all of that. And we had a comment internally the other day. Someone said we need to move this all into TikTok.
I think on that note, I think that's the perfect way to end the panel. Thank you everyone who sat with us, and I hope you all enjoyed the conversation. I think it was some really great insights there across quite a wide spectrum of markets and experiences. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining, and I'll hand back over to Chris.
Yeah, please join me in thanking the panel, James, Oliver, Billy, Alex,